Good morning and welcome to Zen Fits here in Blackstone, Virginia, the center of the world where everything fits. Or does it? Okay, I'm pumped up and ready to go. I got my mic on. I got the live button. I'm live. All right. Making progress here, keeping dementia at bay. Title of this talk is Buddha's 9/11. Buddha's 9/11. Or we could say Sakyamuni's 9/11. Sakyamuni is basically the historical Buddha's name. Sakya Muni. He was a member of the Sakya tribe, and so it's kind of like Jesus is a historical person. So Sakyamuni is the historical person. He became a Buddha, and Jesus becomes the Christ. So it's kind of like that. The Buddha and the Christ are kind of like universals that these historical persons, Sakyamuni and Jesus, embody or give life to. In other words, they give life to this universal idea. Now, what that idea is, so we need to look at. So let's look at Buddha's 9/11. So we need to question, and I was writing on a group this morning, and this is where this talk came out of, was that the focus of the group, or the writer in this group, was on the historical Buddha, questioning, whether he was really in a pleasure palace, like how did he know about suffering? He grew up in a palace, and all of these discussions about the historical Buddha, which is the same thing as in Christianity, where you discussed, well, how many nails were in the cross? And did all of these historical things, did they really exist, and then we come to find out, that all of these stories about the historical Buddha and the historical Jesus were written long after they died, and by different authors and different viewpoints, So nobody was there taking a video of it, you see. It's all legend. It's legend. And not history, it's legend. It's historical legends. So a historical legend is it's like historical teaching. The legend teaches. So the legend of Buddha, Sakyamuni, is a teaching legend. And if you it's kind of like the finger that points to the moon. And if you get to look at the finger and say, oh, well, it needs a little trimming, you see, then you miss the moon. Now you focus on the historical finger. So these stories, the legends, that are, some are fantastic and some are very realistic, depending on the viewpoint. But they're fingers, they're metaphors. They're like art. Art is a metaphor. Art points beyond itself, you see. Art is not documented history. If you think the portrait is factual history, your view of art is very limited. You don't get beyond it, you see. So the question of Buddha, speaking specifically to him instead of jumping over to Jesus, is that what does the legend teach? It's like a movie. Take Indiana Jones, for instance, or Avatar, Jake Sully in Avatar. Now, Jake Sully is a movie character in the same way that Sakyamuni Buddha is a historical character, except the history of Buddha, which would be northern India, 500 years before Christ, you see, which, by the way, was a couple of hundred years before it was even written down. It was all oral tradition. So it took 100 years at least for things to start being written down. Same way with Jesus. Everything was written down to him 100 years after he was gone, There were no eyewitnesses. But anyway, we're trying to get at the point of, all right, so the title of the talk, if I can stay with it, is the Buddha's 9/11. Now, the only way in order to get your teeth into this Buddha legend and make it work for you is that you have to be Buddha. If you're going to watch Avatar, if it's just a movie, well then, you watch it and go on, what's next? When's the sequel coming? But when I watched Avatar, I watched it from a different viewpoint. And it's still giving me insight. I'm still writing about Avatar, years after I saw it. Why? Because it's a teaching movie. The movie's a legend. Avatar's a legend. You could say it's a science fiction, or you could say Indiana Jones is a teaching legend, while the history of Indiana Jones is closer to history than Star Wars, or Avatar, which is science fantasy, you see. So you have historical fantasy and science fantasy, but they're all teaching legends. The legend teaches. In the same way with Zen koans. A Zen koan is a tiny, tiny, tiny legend. It's a tiny, tiny little drama between a monk and a master. And a monk asks a question, and the master gives an answer. And these are contradictory. There's a tension here. There's a contradiction. And the Zen koan holds them together. And so the story of Buddha is like a Zen koan that holds a contradiction together so that it goes wom, 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 wom. When you hold a battery, holds a contradiction together so you can turn on your lights. It holds positive and negative together. You plug it in and it turns on your lights. You see, it's got power. So a koan or a historical legend or a science fiction movie or something, great ones, good ones, are holding a contradiction together, an impossible pair of opposites, an impossible contradiction, and it vibrates with potential. So if you plug in, that potential explodes in you, and you increase your understanding. Your evolution moves. You expand. You get a bigger boat. You grow. You see, it's like a seed. It's planted in you. So you have to get to this contradiction. So getting back to the Buddha, the 9/11 of Buddha, so you could look at the story of Buddha. He lives in a pleasure palace, just as you live, just as we live in a pleasure palace. We all live in a pleasure palace of comfort provided by science, computers, consumer products, all of this stuff. It's all this comfort, you see. We take it for granted. Oh no, the power went off. Oh my God. You see, we live in a pleasure palace. And one day we encounter, like Buddha, Sakyamuni, he encounters old age, sickness, and death. He encounters 9/11. 9/11 was a blow of death to our American pleasure palace of invincibility. our safe, protected pleasure palace that cannot be destroyed. Nobody can attack us. We just, this oceans protected us, Hitler and Japan, they couldn't attack us. Japanese flew some balloons over and they didn't really do anything. I think I was just reading that one of them killed some children up in the woods of Oregon or something, and that was kept quiet. But anyway, we were protected. So 9/11 was what Buddha experienced when he left his pleasure palace and went into town and saw old age, sickness, and death. This is when the doctor calls and says, "I got some bad news. You have terminal cancer." What? This can't be. 9/11. This can't be. The experience of 9/11 was, this cannot be happening. And we all watched it. This cannot be happening. This can't be happening. And yet, there it is. So this was Buddha's 9/11. Legend-wise, you see, he was protected from old age, sickness, and death. Everybody was young. Old people weren't in the palace. All upset was swept out of the way. It was a protected environment. It was a bubble. And by chance, he went out and discovered the thorn to his bubble. He discovered the cactus, the flaw. He discovered the flaw in the bubble of comfort. He discovered the flaw in our consciousness. He discovered the flaw in our consciousness that lives on taking everything for granted. We take everything for granted, you see. We take comfort for granted. We take it all for granted, you see. So Buddha goes out and he discovered, and 3 thorns pricked the bubble. Bam, 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 one after another. 3 planes hit the towers. Bam. Oh, it's just an airplane. Oh, bam. Oh my God, this is not just an accident. This is when the oh my God happened. The first one was, it was an accident. A plane had hit the plane, a bomber, a B-25, had hit the other building before, in the fog. It had hit the, forgot the name of it. But then when 9/11 was, it was an accident. Some plane hit it. Oh my God. But that second plane was Buddha's discovering old age sickness, was discovering death to all that he took for granted. The death of all he took for granted, the death of his palace, the death of his comfort zone, the death of his consciousness itself, you see. So then that was an awakening, was a blow, was a slap of reality. And then he saw, now what am I going to do? He said, what am I going to do now? And the 4th thing he saw was a renunciate, a monk, who had renounced the world, who was going in a different direction. Where was he going? He was going to find what was beyond old age, sickness, and death. He was going to find what was beyond consciousness and the little pleasure palace of consciousness. Consciousness is not all that we hype it up to be. We think it is everything. It is not. Consciousness is just a little bubble that protects us from reality. With movie, the Seinfeld, there's a bubble boy. A lot of movies about the bubble boy. It's in a bubble, protected from viruses, protected from germs. Trump's wall protect us from the germs of immigration. See, we want to live in this walled-in bubble world of consciousness. So consciousness is a palace or castle where we all gather together in a collective consciousness to protect us from reality, from death, from old age, sickness, and death. So when this pleasure palace collapsed, it is your pleasure, my pleasure palace, when we stumble upon reality. And we first reaction to reality is, this can't be. This can't be happening. Reality can't be. You see, it's the pop of the bubble. And of course, this is what Zen is. Zen is just one pop after another, where your pleasure palace, all that you take for granted, just pops, and you're left exposed. Now, what are you going to do? Now, what are you going to do? Well, that was Buddha's question. Now, what am I going to do? I'm going to follow a different compass. I'm going to go beyond the pleasure palace. I'm going to go beyond good and bad, all that I take for granted. I'm going to go beyond and beyond and beyond. Anyway, thanks for dropping in. Hope you have a 9/11.